right, hello, everyone. I'm Brandon. I am an instructor with LSATMax. I see we have, wow, what a turnout. 362, 364, lots of people here. Thanks for coming. So obviously this is a well-attended webinar. What we're going to do today is I'm going to walk you through the logical reasoning section of the LSAT. It was up until very recently, and I see you guys discussing this in the chat box, it was up until the Lsat Flex reared its ugly head, the crown jewel of LSAT sections, because it was worth half of your score. And I'm going to talk about that, although things have changed a little bit for the Lsat Flex. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. So the way this is going to be structured, if you look down at the bottom, there's a couple of different boxes that you can click into. In the participants box, you can raise your hand and I can call on you, and you'll be able to talk to everybody during the presentation. Now, at some points in the presentation, I'm going to ask for participation. At that point, you can raise your hand. I see a couple of hands raised already. I would love to be able to answer your questions. So I can't do that quite at this moment, but there is also a Q&A box. If you have a question that you'd like to be answered at the end of this session, I'm going to do about a half an hour of questions. Q&A if you guys have enough questions to fill that up at the end. So you can fill it in there, or you can raise your hand then. Hopefully you saw, it's probably way up at the top of the chat box now because a lot has gone on, but there is a booklet for you to follow along, and I see we just posted it again. I'm going to be working through some slides that are keyed to the booklet that is at that link, but you should definitely go to that link, download the booklet, you can follow along. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen with you. And then we are going to walk through this little logical reasoning presentation. Screen, start broadcast. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen. LSATMax, the road to 180 starts right here. So on the first page of this presentation that we're going to work through, there's a bunch of information that applied for a long time, and then the Lsat Flex came along and changed things. And so let me just talk to you guys for a second about what the Lsat Flex is. I saw some questions and comments in the chat box coming in, along with what I think are some rumors. So because the March and April LSATs were both canceled, and because it is impossible for the makers of the LSAT, LSAC, to serve an in-person LSAT in the near future, they've decided to create an at-home LSAT called Lsat Flex. Now, the way that Lsat Flex works is that you're going to take it at home at a desktop or laptop computer. You'll be monitored by a remote proctor who's watching you through your webcam, listening to you through your microphone. And that exam is just 3 35-minute sections. Well, the LSAT before the Lsat Flex was 5 35-minute sections, and they've done away with a couple of the sections. So as you can see here, when it says where LR fits into the exam, those 5 sections, 4 of them were scored sections, and 2 of those scored sections were always logical reasoning. Now the way that it works is that there is just one of each of these type of sections. There's one logic game section, one logical reasoning section, and one reading comprehension section. What that means is that logical reasoning is now worth 1/3 of your score, whereas before, when it was 2 out of 4 scored sections, it was half of your score. There have been rumors that LSAC was going to double weight the one logical reasoning section in order to bring it in line with how the LSAT has been before, with logical reasoning being the crown jewel of the sections, being more important than the other sections, but they are not doing that. Each question will be worth as much as any other question. Now, there are little differences in the overall number of questions that they will give you on a section. Usually logic games has the least. A logical reasoning section has about a middle amount of questions, and then reading comp usually has the most. But that's how the Lsat Flex is going to work. It is possible that exams coming in the future are also going to be Lsat Flex exams. The May exam is definitely LSAT Flex. The June exam could very well be LSAT Flex. And even after all of this is over, if LSAC finds that they like doing LSAT Flex, then you might find that LSAT Flex continues into the future. So I don't know. But that is the LSAT Flex. Now let me talk to you about how the LSAT is normally structured, because we will probably be going back to that. So where does logical reasoning fit into the exam? As I was saying, there are 4 scored sections. On test day, you will take a 5th unscored section as well. So the 4 scored sections, 2 of them are logical reasoning. And in a logical reasoning section, you'll get somewhere between 24 and 26 questions. Each question has a paragraph. Usually the paragraph contains an argument. And then you'll have a question asking you about that argument, like what's the argument's conclusion, or how could you make this argument better, or what's wrong with this argument. As I was saying before the LSAT Flex, that was about half of your score. There are also reading comprehension. So the reading comprehension section is the section that most students feel the most familiar with. You'll get 4 passages and somewhere between 5 and 8 questions appended to each passage. I think it's a little misleading for them to call it reading comprehension because it's more than that. They're testing your ability to read a judicial opinion, which is what you will read in law school. That will be most of your reading. And in that, you are tracking the arguments of plaintiff and defendant. You're being critical of those arguments. And so it's more on the LSAT than just comprehending what you read, like reading comprehension sounds like. I would call it argument analysis, I think is a more accurate way to look at it. And then finally, there's a logic game section. Logic games, if you have not studied for the LSAT yet, are going to blow your mind. They don't look like anything you've done before. They don't look like anything you're going to do in law school. Instead, in a logic game, they'll give you a setup, which is a situation. They might give you something like 7 runners running a race, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then they will give you rules about how those runners finish that race. Like runner A must finish after runner C. Runner D can't finish first or last. And then they will ask you, after they've given you those rules about the situation, to figure things out. This is odd, and we will have, or we have had a presentation on logic games as well. It is the most learnable section of the exam. It's also usually has the least questions, maybe 23 or 24 questions. Those 4 sections put together compose the entirety of your score on the exam on a regular LSAT. There is also a 5th section, a 5th 35-minute section that you will take on test day. It's just an extra one of these 3 section types, and that's the experimental section. What the experimental section is on one of the most stressful days of your life, you are paying the makers of the LSAT for the privilege of being their guinea pig. In the experimental section, they are testing out questions that will count on future exams, but do not count on your exam. So for instance, if you had 2 logic game sections on test day, one of them would be the experimental. What's unfortunate is that you won't know which is the experimental while you're doing it. You will only be able to figure it out afterward. So in theory, you could just sleep through the section, take a nap, and your score would be the same, but you won't know while you're doing it, so you just have to try hard. Those are the 5 sections you'll see on test day. There is also a take-home writing sample that you must do within, I think, 1 year of having taken the LSAT. It is also a 35-minute section. When the LSAT was all of these sections, there were about 100 scored multiple choice questions per exam. On the LSAT Flex, there's going to be probably about 75. Your scaled score is 120 to 180. That will not change with the LSAT Flex. The scaled score will be the same. The way that you should anticipate the scoring to work is that they're trying to make the LSAT Flex about as difficult as a regular LSAT, just smaller. And so whatever percentage of questions correct would get you a particular score on a regular LSAT, somewhere around that same percentage of questions correct should get you that score on the LSAT Flex. So really the only big change about it is that it's just 1 logical reasoning section instead of 2. If we ever go back to the regular LSAT, logical reasoning is once again going to become the most important section because it will be 2 out of 4. So what are you being tested on with logical reasoning? Well, really, and this is true of all of the LSAT, you're being tested on these two things: logic and argument analysis and evaluation. I think, and this is true in the logical reasoning section, that this is about how it plays out. About 1/3 of what you are being tested on is logic, and about 2/3 is argument analysis and evaluation. And I'll explain what I mean by all of these in a second, but these are interrelated things that you do. This is, unless you were a philosophy major who took a lot of like symbolic logic and critical thinking classes, this is going to be entirely new for you, these concepts. And so studying, you're going to probably be starting well below where you want to be eventually, because these will be new concepts. So we're going to get some experience with real questions, real logical reasoning questions dealing with all of these concepts. But let me just work through a couple of examples so we can know what exactly it is that we're talking about here. So logic. Let me give you a couple of statements. But logic really is just when you take a couple of ideas and you put them together according to a set of rules, and you come up with a third unique idea. That's logic. The logic that you have been doing for almost all of your life is math. Math is a kind of logic. If I told you I have 3 apples, I'm going to the store to buy 2 more apples, you would be able to put those 2 statements together and determine that once I've done that, I'm going to have 5 apples. That is logic, combining a couple of statements, getting a third statement. Luckily, math, for the most part, is not really tested on the LSAT. There are some mathy concepts that are tested on the LSAT, and we'll actually see 1 or 2 of those. But that's the basic idea. And so let me show you how logic will work on the LSAT. So let's say I gave you these 2 statements. All lawyers are wealthy, and all wealthy people are deliriously happy. All right. I'm sorry, I'm going to lower these hands that are raised right now because I cannot answer these questions. But let me throw it open to you guys. With these 2 statements, all lawyers are wealthy and all wealthy people are deliriously happy. Do you think you could put these together and come up with a third statement? I see it being typed in. I think Amber was the first, so I'm going to allow you to talk. Amber, tell me, what can we determine from these? Can you hear me? Hold on. All right, now you should be able to talk. Huh.
Mute myself. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So all lawyers are deliriously happy because of the all statements. You can just combine lawyers and deliriously happy.
From this, we could determine, and thank you, that all lawyers are deliriously happy. I'm going to turn you off, I think, again. You could conclude this. And let me show you why you could conclude this. Deliriously happy. So when I say all, what I'm saying is that this set of lawyers, all of them live within this larger set of people who are wealthy. So let's say of all the thousands of lawyers, we know that they live within this set of wealthy people. That's what our first statement is saying to us. The next statement is saying that all of those wealthy people live in this even bigger circle of deliriously happy people. Well, what you can tell from this is that lawyers, combining those statements, live inside that deliriously happy circle. And so this is why logic works. This is, you can call it set logic, although I don't know if that would match set logic in math, but that's why this works. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, Branden, these statements are not true. It is not the case that all lawyers are wealthy. There are plenty of lawyers who do public interest, and while they might not live paycheck to paycheck, they're not wealthy. And it is certainly not the case that all wealthy people are deliriously happy. There are plenty of wealthy people who are kind of, I don't know, not happy, I guess I'll put it nicely. But that doesn't matter on the LSAT. And that's what's different about the LSAT than about a lot of other tests, is that it doesn't matter if what they're saying to you is true in the real world. Instead, the logical relationships between statements is what matters. So this is why this works, and this is one of the most common types of logic on the LSAT. And like I said, that's about 1/3 of logical reasoning. So I see, can we use scratch paper for this section? Yes, you can use scratch paper, I believe, for all sections of the exam. I know on the Lsat Flex, they're going to give you 5 sheets, or they're going to allow you to have 5 sheets, I think, to use however you want. All right, so that's logic. Now let me talk to you about what is the other and probably more important skill to be tested on the LSAT, which is argument analysis and evaluation. And argumentation is hugely important on the LSAT because that's what lawyers do. Lawyers make their own arguments. They want to make sure that their arguments are strong, sound, logical arguments. They want to be good at being able to pick out what's wrong with arguments, not just to attack opposing counsel's arguments, which they will be doing, but also to be able to identify the weaknesses in their own arguments. So let me give you an example of an argument, and we can talk through each of these things. So an argument really consists at its most basic level of at least 2 parts. There's a conclusion. That's the thing that the author is trying to prove to you, is trying to convince you. That's the most important statement in an argument. And then there's also always at least one premise, which is evidence for the conclusion. It's a reason that the author offers you to convince you that the conclusion is true. Let me give you this argument. I'm going to ask you about the pieces, and then we'll talk about how good of an argument it is. So let's say I told you this. The odds of a flipped coin coming up heads is 1 in 2. I just flipped a coin and it came up heads. I'm sorry, tails. Therefore, on the next flip, it will be heads. So note I said that there's argument analysis and evaluation going on here, and those are 2 different things. Well, argument analysis is just where you're being asked to describe what it is you are saying. So on the LSAT, they won't give you your argument structured like this. The way I structured the argument with statements above a line and a statement below the line tells you where the conclusion is. The conclusion is below the line, tells you where the premises are above the line. But they won't do that on the LSAT. But you'll still have to figure out which of these statements is which of those pieces of an argument. And that's argument analysis. And so if they asked you something like, what is the main point of this argument? Well, the main point of an argument is always its conclusion. And so in this case, the right answer choice to that question would be, on the next flip, this coin will come up heads. That's argument analysis. I have identified the conclusion. Much more important than that is argument evaluation. And I see, oh, hey, Jordan. Jordan knows what fallacy is going on here. So this argument evaluation, when I say evaluation, I'm talking about, is it a good or a bad argument? I see you guys have already identified that this is a terrible argument. This is not a good argument. But I mean, it seems good, right? The odds of coming up 1 and 2, coming up heads is 1 and 2. I flipped it once, it was tails. Why doesn't that mean it won't come up heads? What is wrong with this argument? I've seen a couple of ways to address it. And I think this is a good one. Zadie, I think I'm pronouncing your name right. The odds are always 50-50. When Jordan identified this as the Gamblers Fallacy, what the Gamblers Fallacy is when you assume that something that happened in the past affects the odds of what is going to happen in the future. Well, it's not the case that one flip has to even out the other flip, so something comes up 50-50. Instead, every time I flip a coin, the odds are 50-50. And so the next time I flip a coin, even though it came up tails last time, there's still just a 50-50 chance of it coming up heads. This is one of the flaws that we teach in LSATMax. In our errors in reasoning section, there are 33 common fallacies on the LSAT. And if you sign up for the course, you will see those. And when you see these on questions, and they're all over the place, not just in error and reasoning question types, you'll be able to see what's going wrong. But that's how the LSAT works. And that, I think, is, out of all of these, the most important skill to have is argument evaluation. Is this argument good or bad? How so? If you are able to answer questions like that, then you will be doing the work that the makers of the LSAT have assigned to you. All right. So that is how it fits into the exam. Just make sure I said the things that I wanted to say here. The way the rest of this presentation is going to work is we're going to do logical reasoning questions that are addressing different concepts that are very commonly tested on the LSAT. So for the most part, most of these are different question types. But what I'm most concerned with is what is the concept that the question is testing. So let's move on to this next portion of our presentation right here, where it says conditional logic. We were actually doing something a little bit like this when we were doing those lawyers and being deliriously happy thing. But conditional logic is the most common type of logic that you're going to see tested in logical reasoning. And a conditional statement is just an if-then statement. When you have conditional statements, they mean more than they seem like they mean when you first look at them. And they can also be manipulated to come to conclusions. So if you look at this question over here, I'm not going to read through the whole thing right now. But in this paragraph, the thing we call the stimulus, there are two statements. Each of them are if-then statements. And so when you see something like that, you know you're being tested on conditional logic, and there are rules for how this stuff works. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to teach you, there's just a couple of skills that you would need to address this question. I'm going to teach you those skills, and then I'm going to turn you loose on this question. I'll give you about 90 seconds, and hopefully you'll be able to work through it on your own at that point. So let me give you an example. So here's my example. Let's put it over here. If you travel by air, you must wear a seatbelt. This is a true statement. Whenever you have an if-then statement, you can always diagram it. And here's how you diagram an if-then statement. You just draw a little arrow. The stuff that comes right after if goes on the left side. Let's call that travel by air. I would abbreviate it like that. Where seatbelt is the other half of the statement. We call these conditional statements because I'm not talking about any particular person or any particular flight or anything. I'm just saying here is a rule about how traveling by air works. And if you are going to travel by air, then this rule applies to you. Whenever you have a conditional statement, it says more than it seems like it's saying. So let's just explore this concept a little bit. So what do you think? Do you think we can just flop these things around? If you must wear a seatbelt, then you are traveling by air. Is that true? No. There are seatbelt laws about driving. Most states require you to wear a seatbelt while you're driving, but you're not traveling by air. This is bad reasoning. You can't just flop these things around. What about if we were to negate the terms? If you don't travel by air, then you don't have to wear a seatbelt. Is that true? Again, and it's wrong for the same reason. Plenty of people are not traveling by air. They're driving, some other things that require you to wear a seatbelt, and yet you are still required to wear a seatbelt. So you cannot just negate the terms. But look what happens when you do both. You reverse the terms and you negate them. This is what you get. If you aren't required to wear your seatbelt, then you are not traveling by air. And that is a true statement. It's what's known as the contrapositive. And anytime you accept a conditional statement as true, you are also accepting its contrapositive as true. And look what they're doing over here. They say, okay, if the statements above are true, they're saying accept these conditional statements as true. Well, what you have to know is that you are also accepting the contrapositive as true. Let me get these other ones out of the way because they're bad reasoning. You don't want to use them. Anytime a conditional statement is true, if you reverse and negate all terms, that statement is also true. This is half of what I need to teach you to address this question. Let me give you one more example and we'll see the other thing that you need to do to address this question. Let's say I told you this. If you must wear a seatbelt, then you are traveling faster than a person can walk. Faster than walking. So this is also a conditional statement and it can be diagrammed and it looks like this. If you must wear a seatbelt, then you are traveling faster than walking. Whenever you have this situation, and only this situation, where there is a common term that appears on the right side of one arrow and on the left side of another, you can combine and collapse those statements. And this is where conditional logic comes in. So if we were doing a question that said, if the statements above are true, which one of the following must be true? And these two statements were the statements in the stimulus, you could combine them and figure out if you are traveling by air, then you are traveling faster than walking. The right answer choice to a question with these two statements in the stimulus would either be this thing that we just came to this conclusion, if you're traveling by air, then you're faster than walking, or it's contrapositive. If you are not traveling faster than walking, you are not traveling by air. The right answer choice to a must be true question with these statements in the stimulus could only be one of those two things and nothing else. So this is all of the tools that you need to address this question. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do, I'm going to bring the question up in just a second, diagram it, combine the statements that you can in the transitive, and then anticipate that the right answer choice will either be that conclusion or it will be the contrapositive of that. Christine asked, what were these called again? Conditional statements. Oh, contrapositive, transitive. When you combine those two statements together, that's the transitive. When you reverse and negate a conditional statement, that's the contrapositive. All right, so let me bring this guy up. I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to attack this question. Have at it. Alrighty. So I don't know if that was 90 seconds. It's close. I see lots of answers. Most of them are the correct one. So here's how I diagram this. If you do not have any keyboarding skills, then you cannot use a computer. If you cannot use a computer, then you cannot use a word processor. This is our magical formula right here. There's a shared term that appears on the right side of one of the arrows and on the left side of another, meaning you could combine and collapse these statements and come to this conclusion. If you don't have keyboarding skills, then you cannot use a word processor. The right answer choice could look like this, or it could look at like the contrapositive of this statement. Since these terms are already negated, when you are performing that negating part of reversing and negating to take the contrapositive, you would remove the slashes. So that would look like this. If you can use a word processor, then you have keyboarding skills, which gets you to, like I was saying, most people got the right answer, C. If you are able to write your essays using a word processing program, then you have at least some keyboarding skills. That's the right answer. A lot of these answers are just really, really close to one another, and it's hard to see the difference between them. But let's just take a look at a couple of the popular wrong answers, A and I think E. Well, actually, there are a lot of popular wrong answers. But this is why it's so important to diagram and take the contrapositive, because you just know anything that's not formulated like one of these two things has to be wrong. So if you look at A, it looks like this. If you have keyboarding skills, then you can use a word processor. That doesn't match this first one because the terms aren't negated. It doesn't match the second one because it's reversed, which makes it the wrong answer. E says, if you're not able to write your essays using a word processing program, then you can't use a computer. That's actually just flipping this statement around. It's just taking that statement from the stimulus and flipping it without negating it, which is why that's wrong. Let's look at B2. I see people are clamoring for B. B says, if you are not able to write your essays using a word processing program, you have no keyboarding skills. If word processor not, keyboarding skills not. That's what answer choice B looks like. It's backward from this guy. It's reversed without being negated. It's negated from this guy. We would have to reverse it. Since it does not match either one of those, it makes it the wrong answer. So it is, these questions are difficult, especially in that the answer choices all look really a lot like one another. But if you take the time to put in the work, then you can compare the answers with your anticipation, and anything that does not match your anticipation just can't be the right answer. That is conditional logic. So Ike asks, is E true but not the best answer because it doesn't include the entire statement? No, E cannot be derived from the statements in the stimulus. As much as an answer choice might seem to you reasonably derived from the stimulus, when you see something like, if you use a word processor, then you have keyboarding skills, your mind goes directly to something like, well, then if I have keyboarding skills, obviously I can use a word processor. That might make sense, but the question is not whether or not it makes sense, it's whether it can be logically derived from the statements in the stimulus, and nothing besides the correct answer could be logically derived at all from the statements in the stimulus. So I would not say it's true, I just say it sounds reasonable, which doesn't make it good enough to be the right answer. All right, so that's conditional logic. That is the most common type of logic in the logical reasoning section. But there are other types of logic. Here's one, quantitative logic. So when I say quantitative, quantity is an amount. And as I was saying before, the LSAT is not a test of math, but it is a test that includes some mathy concepts. And so a lot of times when they start giving you numbers, like here, you'll see things like 38%, 29%. You're going to have to figure things out given those numbers. So let's read through this question. and we'll talk through how it works. Make sure I'm saying all the things I want to say, and I think I am. This is another question. It's the same question type as last time, a must be true question. Those are questions that often focus on logic rather than argument analysis and evaluation. But here's what they're asking us. All of the students at Harrison University live in one of two residence complexes, either Pullum or Westerville, although just a small fraction of the classes at Harrison are night classes. 38% of Harrison students take at least one night class. The figure is lower for Harrison students living in Westerville. Only 29% of those students take at least one night class. All right, so they gave us a couple of percentages. And then if you look at the answer choices, we've got to find something that has to be true given these statements. Things like more than 38% of students at Harrison who live in Pullum take a night class. More than 50% of students who take night classes at Harrison are from Pullum. More students at Harrison live in Westerville than live in Pullum. All of these are giving us numbers. And it starts to be mind-boggling. But let's work through it and see what information we have. Once we are the master of the information that we have, we can figure out what information that guarantees. So when I do these quantitative logic problems, especially if I'm doing them at home and doing my homework, and I have plenty of time, I will give myself some round numbers to work with because that makes it a lot easier to figure out what's going on. So we have Harrison University. Let's say, for the sake of argumentation, Harrison University has 200 students overall. They tell us that everybody, every single one of them, lives in either Pullum or Westerville. They don't tell us if there are more or less in one or the other. So let's just make our lives easier and just divide them up into half and say, okay, Pullum, there's 100 people. Westerville, there's 100 people. And now we get some information, and let's figure out where each of these goes. Yeah, so as far as the chat notifications, if you guys want to private message me the right answer, that would probably be more helpful than sending it to everybody, because that tends to distract people as they are trying to address the question. So please, if you want to send it to me privately, awesome. All right, so let's figure out what we know. Although just a small fraction of the classes at Harrison are night classes, 38% of students take at least one of those night classes. So we're talking about HU overall. So when it comes to HU overall, we know that 38% of them take night classes. Well, 38% of 200, I would have had to do this on a calculator. Luckily, I did this math before I got here. That means a total of 76 students overall at Harrison take night classes. They tell us a little bit about how that breaks down among the people in these two different houses where all of these students live. We know that at Westerville, only 29% of those students are taking night classes. Well, if it's just 29%, and this is why I like to give myself round numbers like this, if it is just 20, I can write a 9, I know I can. That's kind of a 9. If 29% of these students, how would you do it without a calculator, just roughly? Yes. If 29% of these 100 students in Westerville take a class, a night class, that means 29 students, the overall number. 29 students in Westerville take a night class. Well, what are we missing? Here's what we're missing. given all this information, can we figure out what's going on here? I know you guys are like, math. Oh, I hate math. I don't like math. I see some hands up. I'm going to call on Brianna. Brianna, I'm going to call on you. Oh, and I think she lowered. Oh, no. So I've allowed you to talk. You would have to unmute yourself. Do you think you can fill in this last box here? How many people in Pullum are taking these night classes? Can we figure it out?
I know that we can figure it out by subtracting 29 from 76. I just don't know what that is off the top of my head.
So I did it beforehand, and it's 47. So this is what must be true. This is the information that they didn't give us, but this is what must be true, because we know overall there are 76 students at this place taking these night classes. 29 of them only were taking them at Westerville, which means since everybody is in one of these two houses, everybody, all of the other ones are in Pullum. So what that means is that 47 Pullum students are taking these night classes, or in other words, as we'll get you to the correct answer, 47% of these students are taking night classes. So once you've figured this out, once you've put in the time, the answer choice presents itself. The only answer that goes along with that conclusion is this one. And A is the correct answer to this question. More than 38% of the students at Harrison who live in Pullum take a night class. Yeah, the way these numbers work out, it would have to be about 47%. All of these other answer choices are things that we just can't get out of these statements. I know that this was a fairly difficult question. I could spend a lot of time explaining this, and I'm sorry if the explanation didn't make it through right now. But I want to get out the concept so you can see what you're up against as you are studying. This is a fairly common type of logic on the LSAT. And again, giving yourself these round numbers, I think will make your life easier as you are doing that. So Tanya asked, how do you know to assume that there are 200 students? The reason I did that was to make it so that each of these groups had just 100 in it, which makes it very easy to work with percentages. It is not the case that this is the number of students that we know to be there. It's just if the percentages are the way that they're talking about in the stimulus, then no matter what numbers you use, the percentages are going to work out the same way. So those are kind of the two most common types of logic that will be tested in logical reasoning. But like I was talking about, argument analysis and evaluation are more commonly tested. And so for the rest of today's presentation, we're going to do a few questions that are testing those skills. So let's take a look at this one. So this is a different type of question. I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to work through the pieces of an argument and how this works. So we're being asked about curator. Curator says, the decision to restore the cloak of the central figure in Veronese's painting from the present red to the green found underneath is fully justified. Reliable X-ray and chemical tests show that the red pigment was applied after the painting had been completed and that the red paint was not mixed in Veronese's workshop. Hence, it appears likely that an artist other than Veronese tampered with Veronese's painting after its completion. I am going to, for right now, ignore this second argument, because if you look, the question is asking us about the curator's argument. This question was taken from, they don't do this anymore. It used to be that on the LSAT, there would be 2 stimuli, 2 arguments, and then 2 questions. Each would ask you about one of the arguments. This is from one of those older LSATs, but this is the first question asking about the first argument, so we don't have to worry about the other argument. Nishant is asking, would you recommend that we read the question before reading the text? I often do that. It's a matter of, I think, personal preference. Some people read the stimulus too narrowly and ignore things if they're reading the question first and miss things. So if that's what happens to you, then it's probably not for you. Again, please, if you are answering questions, send your answers privately to me. So here's what we are being asked. The assertion that a later artist tampered with Veronese's painting serves which one of the following functions in the curator's argument? So this is an argument structure question, and we are being asked about this statement. It appears likely that an artist other than Veronese tampered with Veronese's painting after its completion. So really with an argument, there are only two possible statement types, but there's a statement type that's a hybrid of the two. And so statements in an argument are all about support. A premise supports a conclusion. A conclusion is supported by a premise. There's a step-by-step process that you should always be going through as you're analyzing arguments. And so your first step is to figure out what is the main conclusion of the argument. So what is the author trying to prove to you here? This statement that they're asking us about starts with the word hence. And hence is a conclusion word. And so just from that word, we know that it is a conclusion. And if you look, there are a couple of answer choices using, well, the first answer says main point toward which the argument as a whole is directed. B is talking about a conclusion. Both of those are talking about conclusions. But we have to know, is it the main conclusion? Is it what the author is trying to convince you of? And do you think that's what the author is trying to convince you of? This actually is not the main conclusion of the argument. I see Tara, or Tara, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, has what I think is the main conclusion of the argument, which is the first sentence. This decision is justified. That's a very common conclusion type, a common main conclusion type on the LSAT, which is a prescriptive statement. This is how things should be done, or this is justified. This is the way to do this thing. So even though the statement we are being asked about is a conclusion, it is actually not the main conclusion. And if you look at that, it provides support for the main conclusion. And here is how this argument works. I think there's a premise. Then there is the statement we are being asked about, which is an intermediate, and I'm giving away the right answer now, or a subsidiary conclusion, which supports the main conclusion. So sometimes you can kind of give yourself like a roadmap with these by drawing arrows of what supports. So here, this statement in the middle, talking about X-ray and chemical tests, shows that it wasn't done in Veronese's workshop. That provides support for the idea that it was tampered with after it was completed. The idea that it was tampered with supports this broader idea that restoring it to the original color is justified. It was tampered with, therefore restoring it was justified. Because this statement is both supported by another statement in the stimulus and provides support for another statement in the stimulus, it is a subsidiary conclusion. B is the right answer. I think I saw somebody ask about D. It is a particular instance of the general position to be defended. Well, if we were seeing an argument set up like that, then there would be like a general position to be defended, which might be something like, I don't know, let's say the general position that we are defending is it's okay to eat your cereal with apple juice instead of milk. Well, a particular instance of that would be my friend Steve, who has great taste, eats apple juice with his cereal rather than milk. That would be a particular instance of a general position. But here I don't think there is a general position at all. Instead, I think the main conclusion is also specific. This specific painting should be restored. So I think that mischaracterizes the stimulus. You can always get rid of wrong answer choices that are mischaracterizing the stimulus. So B is the right answer. That's argument analysis. Here are 3 statements. You tell me how each one of those fits into the argument. that is a skill that I think is tested less often than argument evaluation. Remember, when we were talking about argument evaluation, we're talking about, is this argument good or bad? So I've got another question that we're going to work through here. If you look, this question is asking us specifically to do argument evaluation. It's vulnerable to what criticism? They're asking you not just what is it doing, they're asking you how is it failing? What is wrong with it? So let's go through this and let's think through it. This question says, a birth is more likely to be difficult when the mother is over the age of 40 than when she is younger. Regardless of the mother's age, a person whose birth was difficult is more likely to be ambidextrous than is a person whose birth was not difficult. Since other causes of ambidexterity are not related to the mother's age, there must be more ambidextrous people who were born to women over 40 than born to women younger than 40. Since introduces a premise. I think there are several premises here. And then we have our main conclusion. The first thing you always want to do in addressing an argument is to identify the argument's main conclusion. And the main conclusion, I think, is the last half of this sentence, starting here. There must be more ambidextrous people born to women over 40 than ambidextrous born to women under 40. So more ambidextrous with over 40 moms. Now they lead you through a whole bunch of stuff, but let's pick out what I think they're trying to get you to rely upon to come to this conclusion. So they tell you this, a person whose birth was difficult, and we know that that's true with women over 40, it's more likely to be difficult, is more likely to be ambidextrous. So I think what you could say and what I think these statements do guarantee is that a greater proportion of people with over 40 moms are ambidextrous. In other words, if you're born to an over 40 mom, you're more likely to be ambidextrous. Well, doesn't that just mean that there are more ambidextrous people over 40 who are born to moms over 40? Why does the conclusion not actually follow from the premises? And again, I will, you can raise your hand if you would like to answer this question. You know, I have hands raised already, so I'm not sure which ones are raised in connection with the question. If your hand is still up, I'm just going to call on you. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Shiomara, would you like to talk? I just unmuted you, but you're going to have to, I think, unmute yourself if you would like to talk. Oh, no. Let me, I think Courtney raised her hand specifically here, so let me, no. How about Nicholas? All right. Nicholas, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. So what do you think is wrong with this?
I thought that basically, I just chose B, but it's kind of hard for me to point out the logic.
So B is the correct answer, and we will get to that. But here's what's wrong with this. So we're making a comparison here between these groups. People born to women over 40, people born to women under 40. We know that a higher percentage of people born to women over 40 are ambidextrous. But a higher percentage does not necessarily mean a higher amount. And so how many people overall are born to women over 40 as opposed to how many people overall are born to women under 40? And here again is where, even though you're not being asked to like finish equations, you're still being asked to do some math. And again, I think giving yourself round numbers and thinking about this, let's say that when it comes to the over 40 crowd, let's say 50% of them are ambidextrous, whereas those born to the under 40 crowd, only 10% of them are ambidextrous. The reason this argument is so bad is because let's imagine that there are just 100 people born to the over 40.
Not that embarrassing, though. Oh, wait, what's happening?
I'm going to be muting people.
Mute.
Yeah, if you are not muted, then please mute yourself. Yes. And let's assume that there are, I don't know, 100,000 of these people born to the under 40s. That would mean that even though you are much more likely to be ambidextrous if you're born to a person over 40, there are only 50 of those people total. And here, 10% of 100,000, if I remember correctly, is actually
Hey, Branden,
10,000.
I'm
Yes.
going to butt in really quick. Can you share your screen on your iPad?
What happened? My
I
screen
don't
is
know.
not sharing. I'm just
Thank
sitting
you.
here writing. No, thank you. Everybody sees? So here's what I was writing and babbling like a crazy person while nobody else was following along with me. This is what the premise tells us. You have a higher chance if you're born to someone over 40 of being ambidextrous. Let's say it's a 1 in 2 chance. That's a pretty high chance. You have a lower chance if you are born to a woman under 40. But if the overall totals are like this, and I think this is true in real life, I think the vast majority of people are born to mothers under 40. I think it's much more rare to be born over 40. Then even though this number is bigger, 50% is bigger than 10%, the way it ultimately is going to shake out is that there are still very few people who are ambidextrous. So that's what's wrong with this argument. You have to kind of drill down to see what's going on. But, and this is what's important, is that this is a common flaw. This is treating percent as evidence of amount. Now, the first time you come across one of these concepts, it's important to work through it. But if you see this enough, and they will give you the same problem just with different facts, then you'll know what's going on. All of that is a very long way of getting to the correct answer, which is B. It overlooks the possibility that fewer children are born to women over 40 than are born to women under 40. When they say fewer, they're talking about amount. And like I was saying, treating percent as evidence of amount is a common flaw on the LSAT. And so with enough practice, this is something you will see. You'll know that it's going on in the stimulus. And luckily, you don't have to do the math. You just have to find the answer that addresses the problem with the math. All of these other answer choices are either irrelevant to this argument or they are mischaracterizing the stimulus, which is very common. All right. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to the last question. It's about cause and effect. Cause and effect is an important concept on the LSAT, not just in logical reasoning, but also in reading comprehension. It is important because cause and effect is important when you're a lawyer. Every time you sue a defendant, for instance, if you're a plaintiff, if you say, you know, I'm suing you because you hit me with your car, well, you have to prove causation. You always have to prove that the defendant caused your plaintiff's injuries. And so it becomes very important. So now that we are at 1 p.m., for up to the next half hour, I will go through the questions that you guys have typed into the Q&A box. Wow, there's a lot of them. Hopefully we can get through all of them. But let me just get started. Oh, you want to see the last picture so you can take. That's the last question. All right. Whoops. First question, do law schools see how many times you took the LSAT and do they care? The answers are yes and yes. They will see all of the times you took the LSAT. I think Many, if not most people, take it twice. And so I think that's fine. I think they see that all the time. I think taking it 3 times is okay for the most part. I think taking it more than 3 times can start to be problematic. It looks like you're unable to assess your strengths and weaknesses and resolve them. But they will see all of them, and it does, I think, matter how many times you take it. When question option says mistake sufficient for necessary or necessary for sufficient, it is really difficult to decipher between both types of argument in the answer choice. I'm not sure I understand the question here. That is something that is, those are the same thing, mistaking sufficient for necessary, necessary for sufficient. When we were diagramming, if you diagram things wrong, when we were doing conditional diagramming, that's what that's talking about. Do law schools look at our SAT and ACT scores? No, they do not. What are the best majors? I don't know that there's really a law school major. Law schools expect, you know, they take people from all different walks of life. They take people who studied all sorts of different things. There are majors for particular areas of law. Like if you were going to be a patent attorney, then engineering is a good undergraduate major. But for the most part, there is no major. There's a major that I think helps prepare you for the LSAT, which is philosophy and focusing very heavily on taking symbolic logic courses. What I would say is that you should major in something that you are interested in and that you will get good grades in, and that it's possible to make an argument that it prepared you for law school in some way. But again, I don't think there are any particular majors. I think any major is a law school major. What is the difference between LSAT Flex and regular LSAT? I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. The LSAT Flex is being administered next month in May, I think May 18th and 19th primarily. It is a take-home LSAT. There are just 3 35-minute sections, one each of logic games, logical reasoning, and reading comprehension. It is possible that there will be more LSAT Flexes going forward, although they have not said whether or not there will be. Will LSAT Flex be used up until August? I don't know. I would bet that the June exam at the very least will be an LSAT Flex, but I don't know. They have not made a decision yet. Similar question, will LSAT go back to its previous format once COVID-19 is over? They're saying that they probably will, but they're also leaving themselves the opportunity to not do so. If you look at their website, they talked about how it's possible they'll use it in the future. So I don't have the answer to that question. That's actually the same question. Will we be able to have contact information for both this instructor and others in this series of webinars? No, but you can sign up for LSATMax and become a student and come work with me in office hours. You can also work with me one-on-one tutoring. I do that too. When can we find out if the July exam will be either flex or normal? I don't know the answer to that question. I think the June exam they're going to tell fairly soon because they need to tell us fairly soon, but I don't know. Are there free digital LSAT prep tests that we can access for practice? Hopefully ones that run parallel to the actual test format. I have great news for you. If you download the LSATMax app, you can take the June 2007 LSAT completely free. You don't have to sign up for the course, anything. So you can at least get your feet wet. You can try out the features of the LSATMax app without committing. But yes, that is a free digital LSAT prep test that you can do. Does the LSAT Flex weigh the same as the LSAT to admissions? Well, that's what LSAC has said, and they've reached out, I think, to at least some law schools and tried to convince them to treat the LSAT Flex the same as they would any other LSAT. Law schools can give it whatever weight they want to, though. They're not bound to treat it the same as another LSAT. So having said that, I think I would be really surprised if there are law schools that frown upon the LSAT Flex, because you guys are doing what you need to do to get by in a rough time. And it's not like the LSAT Flex is easy. If you score well on the LSAT Flex, it's still, I think, a good indicator of your skills. So I would not be too worried about that. What is the best way to identify question types for LR? That's a lot of practice. And so we have the questions, you can do them by question type. We have them categorized in our app and in our website. But they like to change up the way the same question is formulated, like properly inferred and follows logically and must be true. Those are all the same type of question. And I think it just takes practice. What advice would you give on approaching a logical reasoning question in which you are torn between two possible answers? So the advice depends on question type, because there are ways to decide between answers depending upon which question type you're doing. So that's a broader conversation. I'm a junior in undergrad. What is the best time to take the LSAT if I want to start school in fall of 2021? Well, what I would say to that is that admissions is going to open up in October of this year of 2020. And all things being equal, it's better to apply early than later, because law schools do rolling admissions and they will start giving away seats immediately. So if you're applying at the beginning, that's when your best chances are. So anytime before October would be ideal. All schools keep their admissions open through February. So anything through early next year, I think would be fine for all schools though. Is scratch paper used for logic game sections? Yes, you will get scratch paper. I don't know that it's section specific. I think you just get scratch paper for the exam and you use it where needed. For June, July test takers that don't know if they will be taking flex or regular LSAT tests, how would you recommend changing study methods? Well, I actually wouldn't recommend changing your study methods much. And the reason for that is logical reasoning is still important. And it's also the case that, and I think this is why they made logical reasoning the section that is the predominant section on normal LSATs. What you learn on logical reasoning applies to the other two sections. What you learn in the other two sections doesn't necessarily apply to each other or to logical reasoning. And so I think you should still give it a lot of attention. It's also the case that every reading comp question is just a logical reasoning question type. But all and only the same subject matter and question types are tested. So I don't think you have to change up much. You might just want to increase logic games and reading comp a little bit and back off a little bit on logical reasoning, but I don't think there's much else you need to do. The flex exam, all sections are scored equally? Yes. Well, all questions are scored equally. So some sections have a few more questions than others, like reading comp usually has more questions than logic games. And so each of those questions in both of those sections counts as much as the other, but because there are more points available in reading comprehension, it's not technically the case that they're scored equally. I tend to read the question stem first. I think I answered this question earlier on, whether you should read the stimulus or the question stem first. I think it's a matter of personal preference. If you find that your focus is narrowed too much after reading the stimulus, then you might want to do it the other way around. Do you think the LSAT Flex will be harder than the normal LSAT, considering there are only 3 sections, so they will try to compromise the time with difficulty? I actually don't think so. I think it's going to be, and they said they're going to try to make it about as difficult as any of the other exams. And the way this exam will be graded is the way that all the other LSATs will be graded, in that it's graded on a curve. So your performance is determined by how well you did with regard to other test takers. And so it will still be the same. If the exam is harder, then the curve will be a little more lenient. If the exam is easier, the curve will be a little bit tighter. Albert, do you think due to the virus there will be more applicants to law school? Yes. And specifically, I think because of the economy. When the economy crashes, people go back to law school. Happened in 2008, 2009. So your competition is probably going to increase, yes. Are there some strategies available for making solutions for the reading comprehension section? There was or will be a reading comp webinar, which you should attend. There is a whole bunch of information in the LSATMax course. And in fact, we cover it comprehensively. That is far, far too big of a conversation to have right now, though. All right, continuing on. I'm an LSATMax premium student. I've taken symbolic logic during my undergraduate, but I'm still struggling with logical reasoning. Is there any other way to approach logical reasoning besides diagramming it, because it takes a lot of time for me? I think maybe 10% of questions on logical reasoning should be diagrammed, if you're talking about conditional diagramming, and the other 90% shouldn't. And so what that sounds like to me is you're probably diagramming too much. If it is not the case that you are seeing conditional statements with shared terms that will link up in the transitive, you probably shouldn't be diagramming. Also, there are just a few question types that are commonly diagrammable: must be true, parallel, strengthened with a sufficient premise. If you are doing one of those question types and you see conditional statements with shared terms, then you should probably diagram. Anything else you probably shouldn't diagram. It's not going to help. How about thinking logically without the negation and arrow tricks? If you can do it, that's great. I cannot do conditional logic in my head. Especially a lot of times they start to give you double negatives and very difficult things to work through. Again, it's personal preference. If you can do it, that's great. I can't. How will they be able to monitor people's academic honesty through LSAT Flex? Well, you're in luck, because you're going to have your webcam turned on, and there's going to be a human staring at you through your webcam, watching you take the exam. They've also said that they're going to record both your webcam and your audio and subject it to further live review and artificial intelligence review. I don't know what that means. I don't know how they're going to do that, but you will be monitored closely. What about questions that aren't conditional and we have answer choices that are similar? I can diagram. I wish I could, this is the kind of question that I can answer looking at a particular question. But again, I think most logical reasoning probably should not be diagrammed. And then it's just picking out answer choices that fit, hopefully, your anticipation. I answered that one in a different format. I answered that one. That one's a lot. Let's see. Can I still get into law school with low GPA if LSAT score is above average of the schools that I apply to? Well, it depends on how far below your GPA is, and it also depends on what school you're applying to. So every school has its median, which I think is what you're talking about here, the average score of the school. Most schools, if you are below their GPA, then coming up past their median LSAT score can even that out. But what you have to know is that these numbers, your GPA and your LSAT, are numbers that if they accept you, they're going to have to report them to the American Bar Association, and those numbers will figure heavily into their rankings. And so for them to accept a low GPA that's going to pull down their average, they have to see that you're going to bring up another average. If you're talking about a school like Yale or Harvard, like a top 5 school, and you have a sub 3.5 GPA, I think you're toast. I just don't think you can get in, because they don't need people to bring up their numbers, and you're just going to bring down their numbers. So I wish it were the case that the LSAT could fix everything. It can fix a lot, but depending upon how prestigious the school is, there are some things it can't fix. Is this similar to how lectures go with a subscription to LSAT Max? Well, they are not live. They are whiteboard video lectures. There's over 100 hours of lectures. And so it's similar, but it's much more in depth. Today we kind of went through things very broadly and kind of an overview, but you'll get, just an hour and a half or more on one particular question type. Can cause and effect be worked through like conditional logic? To some extent, yes, because you can construct causal chains. If A causes B and B causes C, you know that A causes C. The difference is that there is no contrapositive. So it's not that not A causes or not B causes not C. They are similar, but they are different concepts. And I would try to keep them separate. In the one we just did with younger moms and older moms, should we always write out our own numbers? I don't have a math brain, so I just get confused. On test day, no. You're not gonna have time to do that. But as you are practicing, I think it's a really good idea because it gets you used to the concepts. And the way that you really start to improve on the LSAT is when you start to see that they're just giving you the same stuff over and over again. So that question about younger moms and older moms and the percentages and stuff like that, that is the same question they've doled out 1,000 times. So the more practice you get with it, the better off you'll be. What type of technology do you use? I'm not sure I understand the question. LSAT Flex is going to be administered on your desktop or laptop. The in-person LSAT is a tablet-based exam, and they hand out tablets and stylus during the exam. Can I take the LSAT Flex as an international student? Unfortunately, no. I don't think they're offering it for international students. What do you think the percentage of each question is going to be worth on the LSAT Flex 1.33? I mean, they're all, each question is worth as much as any other question, I guess is what I would say. So it's just, I think the way that you should look at it is when you were doing regular LSATs in practice, if a particular percentage of questions correct got you a score, you should expect that getting that same percentage of questions correct overall will get you the same score on the LSAT Flex. Alina asks, Alina, did you take one of my classes a long time ago? Alina asks, I hope she hasn't left yet. If I'm applying for admission in fall 2021, when is the last LSAT I can take? I think I more or less answered this question. You should try to take the LSAT before October of this year if you want to get in. Should I be worried if my college GPA is 3.3? Well, I had a 3.2 when I got into UCLA, but I had a 175 LSAT. So I don't think you have to worry too much. But again, if you're applying to like Harvard and Yale and stuff like that, then yes, you do have to worry. How common are gap years between undergraduate and law school? Very, very, very common. Lots of people take a year off or more. The important information that I think is helpful here is, where's I going with that? I'm not sure. I took 7 years off between undergraduate. Oh, the important information, this is what I was saying. Most schools will accept an LSAT score up to 5 years old. And so you just have to make sure that if you've already taken the LSAT that you're applying before your LSAT score goes stale or you'll have to take it again. Let's see. Do we have to have taken the writing portion for the LSAT before we apply to law school? And how shortly after the LSAT can we take the writing portion? So I think some schools at the very least make it voluntary. And so you don't necessarily have to take it. As far as the scheduling, I know you can take it up to a year after, but I'm not sure how soon after they allow you to do it. It's a take home. I think the ProctorU, the software and the setup that they're using for the LSAT Flex, I think is what they've already been using for people doing the writing sample. If you have a lower GPA but greater than 170 in LSAT, can you still get into a top program? I think I kind of answered this, but for most schools, getting above a 170 can significantly help if you have a lower GPA. It depends on how low it is. But at the really top schools, a low GPA is pretty much guarantees you're not going to get in, regardless of your LSAT. To do criminology, do you have to go to law school? No, there are actually plenty of criminology programs. You know, if you're talking about like administration of justice, things like that, you only have to go to law school if you want to be a prosecutor or a public defender. But plenty of people work in criminology that don't go to law school. Let's see. Does sufficient always go before necessary and only switched when it's negated? Well, yes, the sufficient is always on the left side of the arrow. So even when you switch and negate, the stuff on the left side of the arrow is still the sufficient condition. It's just formulated in the contrapositive. I hope that answers the question. Let's see here. My conclusion premise evaluation is great, but my argument evaluation seems to be the main issue. Any tips for this? So I'm going to, hopefully this won't take too long for me to explain, but being critical of arguments, shorthand for being critical of arguments, doing argument evaluation, the easiest way to do it is to memorize the 33 common fallacies that I was talking about and be actively looking for them in arguments, because a lot of them will commit those flaws. But those flaws are just shorthand for the broader manner of being critical of arguments, which is this. The way arguments work is that you accept the premises as true, and then you're critical about whether or not the conclusion follows from them. So the people who are the best at being critical of arguments are the people who say, okay, I'm going to accept your premises as true, and then I'm going to figure out, even if I have to think creatively about it, how the conclusion might still be false. But that is a much longer discussion. Do law schools look for college prestige? I guess what I would say to that is that I think it will affect how they look at your transcripts. It is also important, like the major and the difficulty of the classes you took. But if you went to a very competitive school with a competitive major, then that's going to be more interesting to them if you got a 4.0 than if you went to a less competitive school with a less competitive major. But I don't think they're just like, well, we only want to recruit out of prestigious schools. I don't think they do that for the most part. I keep getting a couple of questions about when we will know if future exams are going to be LSAT Flex. I'm not sure. Have you heard of PhDs going to law school? Yes, that happens. What are the challenges? Depending upon what your PhD is, it's probably less of a challenge because you'll have interesting stuff to talk about in your personal statement, which will help you get in. You'll also have interesting information to share in your classes, and you might have gotten a leg up on particular classes depending upon what your PhD is in. Again, I don't know that there are challenges. I don't think they're looking to like reject people with higher degrees or anything like that. Here's an easy one. I have a Bachelor of Science in Communication. Will law schools look at that negatively? No, I think they will look at that quite positively. Could you go over the difference between most strongly supported and inference, or is a most strongly supported a type of inference question? Most strongly supported is a type of inference question. Must be true, most strongly supported. Those are all asking you to take information from the stimulus and infer something in the answer choices. The difference between them is that in a must be true question, the right answer choice has to be guaranteed 100% true by the stimulus. In a most strongly supported question, it doesn't have to be that strong. It just has to be strongly supported by the stimulus. The other answer choices will not. What is the writing sample about? On the writing sample, it's a persuasive essay. You will be given a prompt where a person or an organization is trying to decide between two courses of action. You will be required to pick one of those courses of action and argue for it and argue against the other course of action. There will be criteria that the person or organization is interested in satisfying with the decision, and you have to make sure that your argument that you're writing closely tracks those criteria. But as long as you do that, I don't think there's any right answer and you're fine. What advice do you give someone who has no guidance regarding law school admissions? How does one begin with LSAT preparations? Those are very, very broad questions. I don't know that I can answer the first one when it comes to law school admissions. We often give law school admissions workshops. So if there's one coming up, then I would very strongly recommend that you take that law school admissions workshop. It will be helpful for you. As far as how to begin with LSAT preparation, I would strongly recommend that you download the LSATMax app. You can take the June 2000 LSAT for free. You can look at all of the resources for free. You are not required to sign up. And so you can at least start to get an idea of what it's going to require of you. What is my background? I don't know if you're talking about like my personal background or what is the cheesy painting that's behind me, but I'm assuming you're talking about my background. I went to UCLA Law. I focused on criminal law. I came out in 2010, which was during the last financial crisis. I wanted to be a criminal prosecutor. I was not able to find a job. I got stuck doing patent law, which I really hated, and it all just kind of fell apart for me. And so I stopped practicing law. That's my background. The painting is from Ross. What percent in admission determination does GPA play in correlation to LSAT score? Well, the way that I would answer this question is that LSAT, law school admissions is pretty much a two-step process, which is in the first step, they're going to look at your LSAT and GPA scores. They're going to see whether or not those are scores that they would like to report to the American Bar Association. And they will put you into a yes, no, or maybe pile on the basis of those numbers. When you're in that first phase where that's all that they're looking at, it's generally agreed that it's about 60-40 LSAT, that LSAT is more important than your GPA. And that's because LSAT is a better predictor of performance in law school than is GPA. It's also because an LSAT score is standardized. You know, if you got a 165 and somebody else got a 165, you can compare those things. When you're talking about GPAs from different schools, different majors, different classes, it's really hard to compare those. Once you've gotten past that phase, that's when they start looking at everything else and being holistic about it. Let's see, how much time do you recommend preparing for the LSAT, especially if we want to get a high score on the LSAT? Well, that depends on where you're starting from, because I think it's more how many points do you have to increase rather than are you going for a high score. When you sign up with LSATMax, depending upon, well, you'll tell us which LSAT you're studying for, and we will give you a study calendar. That study calendar starts about 4 months out from the LSAT, because studying for the LSAT is difficult, time-consuming, and takes a lot of practice. Anybody who tells you they're going to get you through studying the LSAT in a couple of weeks or something like that is lying to you to try to take your money from you. So I would block off 4 months to study for the LSAT. Some people study for longer. Will you be doing a webinar for logic games and reading comprehension? I'm going to ask Claire to answer that in the chat box. I know we have some set up, but I'm not sure if we did them yet or not. So I don't know when those are coming, but we have made them. Would you say that the chances of getting into law school are better if you wait a year or two before applying to law school? No, I don't think so. You know, plenty of people go right out of law school, right out of undergrad. Plenty of people don't. So I don't think it changes things. I think it's the quality of your application. What is the best time to take the LSAT? The best time to take the LSAT is when you can devote the most time to studying for it. For a lot of students, what that ends up meaning is that they study for it in the summer and take it in the fall because you're off of school during the summer. But when you can devote the most time to it. Let's see. You're getting close to the end here. What else do Ivy League law schools look at besides GPA and LSAT? Well, they look at all the other pieces of your application, just like other schools do, which is personal statement is the most important. Letters of recommendation are very important. You're going to have to submit a resume, which is not that terribly important. You might have to write an addendum or an additional essay, but that's what they're going to be looking at. Let's see. We're at 1:30, and I just wanted to, I didn't give you my spiel, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about what LSATMax offers before I let you guys go. These are the different packages for LSATMax. They come with payment plans, so you don't have to pay the whole thing right out the gate. What I think separates us from other LSAT preparation services is we've been doing at-home LSAT preparation since we started. And I think what people are starting to find out now is that studying for the LSAT by yourself is very difficult. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to make studying for the LSAT online a way of studying for the LSAT where you're not alone. And so I'd just like to point out a couple of the features that come with any of our packages. And again, you can download the app for free. You don't have to purchase to try it out. But we start you off with, and like I was saying, you should study for 4 months or possibly more, instant lifetime access. Once you sign up for LSATMax, you're in the program. All of the benefits that are available to you, including personalized support, are available to you for as long as you're studying the LSAT. You're going to get that study calendar, and you'll be working through over 100 hours of lesson videos that comes with a lot of homework, drills, and other educational materials that go along with it. You're going to be working through, since you'll be on the same calendar as people studying for your LSAT, you're going to be working through the same material around the same time as these people. And so it's a sense of community. People are working through the course at the same time in LSATMax. All of the questions have real-time message boards appended to them. They're heavily trafficked. People are talking about the questions to each other. Instructors are also posting on these boards a lot. A couple of other things that I think are really important. We do weekly office hours. I actually did office hours this morning and yesterday. At least for the month of April, we're doing one every day. And office hours is when one of our 99th percentile instructors will lead you through one concept or question type on the exam. You're free to ask questions and participate. A few more things I'd like to point out to you that I think are very helpful. We are always tracking your performance, whether you're doing a full practice exam or whether you're just doing questions. That's especially important as you get toward the end of the course. We give you a lot of time for review, and tracking your strengths and weaknesses is going to make it so that you're able to spend your time most efficiently studying. The last thing I'll talk about, this is a little less important because it doesn't go with the Lsat Flex, but the way that our interface is set up is that it's functionally identical to the one that LSAC gives you when you take the in-person test, the in-person LSAT. You definitely don't want to learn the mechanics of the test on test day as you were taking it. And so we made sure that we're giving you a practice situation where you don't have to worry about that stuff. That is, I think, all of the stuff that I wanted to talk to you guys about. I know that I left a whole bunch of questions unanswered. I'm sorry to have to do that. I've got to be done here. I actually have another presentation coming very soon. But thank you guys for tuning in and paying attention. I hope this was useful for you, and I hope to see at least some of you in office hours or tutoring sessions sometime soon. But regardless, best of luck on your studies, best of luck on your applications. Stay safe, stay healthy, be well, and thank you. Bye-bye.